Barnett from the Sociology department, who is going to present the project she developed for the Lennihan grant. Josephine, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Josephine Barnett. I am a PhD candidate at the Graduate Center in both the Sociology program as well as the Film Studies graduate certificate. I'm also an adjunct lecturer at Fordham University and Hunter College, where I am lucky enough to be teaching this semester, which was certainly helpful for this presentation, Sociology of Arts in Modern Society. Today, I'll be talking about generational trauma, collective memory, and family photography. I first like to ask, what is the role of family photographs and family albums with respect to personal and collective memory? How can photography be used to reshape, reconstruct, and reclaim oneself through narrative within a family whereby trauma, generational trauma that is, leads to contested, often mnemonic battles of the past? This project is a reimagination. It's a reimagination or a supplement to the visual family archive curated by my nuclear family, who I thank very much for being here today. Through visual narratives and reclaiming my family album, I attempted to reconstruct the self. I challenged conceptions of objectivity and the traditional family photograph that serves to represent the American dream and the over-romanticized version of the golden age of the American family. To begin briefly, I'd like to just give a brief definition of generational trauma. It is a collective experience, including memories, which shape identity of trauma by specific cultural groups across generations. That coupled with collective memory, I'd like to emphasize that cultural trauma is a shared belief group, meaning that it is an internal logic linking one's personal and collective past to the present suffering and resilience shared and passed down generationally. And my goal was to use photographs and to see the role of photographs in this as a ritual in this process. Given COVID, I was limited a bit with my data availability. Therefore, I used my own family photographs to reconstruct. So as it states here, and what I'd like to mention before I'm cut off, is that family photos can conceal or obscure a traumatic past, or it could do the opposite. It can expose a violent event experienced generationally, primarily among women. I'd like to mention particularly that of instant photography, where many, particularly Esther Solar, has had a TED Talk about how we turn the tide on domestic violence with the help of the Polaroid, as it has served as a means for mostly females to be able to hold their perpetrators accountable in court without having to provide testimony of their own. My main research questions at the moment that I have been able to somewhat tackle has been, what is the role of family photo album with respect to and personal and collective memory and identity, and how can photography be used to reshape, reconstruct, and reclaim oneself through narrative within a family whereby trauma leads to contested mnemonic battles of the past? But how do I analyze these recreated family photographs, ones that I've created? It became extremely difficult for me to find a methodology that has done this before. So I looked and I decided that I would integrate two: critical autoethnography and visual autobiography, both of which emphasize self-reflexivity, which is important given the subjective nature of my data, and also emphasizes the co-construction of meaning, addressing context and time suited for exactly what I attempt to seek. I hope to reveal the hidden. What is attempted to be viewed in a photograph is very interesting, but what is left out of the frame is just as telling. Here's one example of a way in which I have reconstructed or provided a supplemental archive where I call it marriage as survival, visual projection of imagination generationally through trauma. The left being an image I created on my own, and the right being an original family photograph. Here, I'll end here, is the use of photos as evidence for oneself is just as important in court and to oneself because it offers evidence. Photos are evidence. They help victims in multiple ways. And I find that reconstructing, using both what shared collective memory our family or our larger national family has, integrating that with our own personal remembrance of the past could be useful and empowering and also revealing to the social roots of the systemic mass acts of violence towards women, specifically relating to domestic violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Josephine. All right, so we're now moving to Sarah Frazard, who is a PhD candidate in biology and who is going to share her project about art and biology.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about our collective fabric, the microbiome. And so this is about a project that uses art-based practices to communicate science, really with the goal of just sparking curiosity about science in the general public. So let me first introduce you to the team that makes this up, that makes up the collective that works on this. It's me, Sarah Frazard. I'm a PhD student in biology in the Jane Raper Lab at Hunter College. I'm also in the Interactive Technology and Pedagogy program at the Graduate Center. I work with Floor Grutenhuis, who's an artist in residence in the Jane Raper Lab, and Jessica Dawes, who's an undergraduate student at Hunter College. And now let me introduce you to the microbiome. This is the unique collection of organisms that lives on us and inside of us and actually outnumbers us when we're talking cell number to cell number. There's more microbes living on us and inside of us than there are our own human cells. And when I say that the microbiome is a unique collection, it's because it's unique to you. It's unique to the foods that you eat and the areas that you live in. And I'm really going to focus today on the microbiome that lives on us. And so this project really started in 2019 at the Civic Art Lab with our collective fabric. So here, Floor, the artist, invited people to come and streak the bacteria and all the other microbes that were growing on their skin onto these nutrient plates that had all the food that the bacteria needed to grow, but then to also streak them onto one large collective plate. And so that's what we see here. And it was really a way for people to experience our collective microbiome. So they were streaking all of our unique microbiomes onto one nutrient plate to create a fabric that really showcases the diversity of microbes that we interact with. And it's really a metaphor for the diversity of a healthy society. So when Floor joined our lab at Hunter College, we got really excited, me and Jessica, and we all wanted to work together to bring this to life again, except COVID happened. And so we kind of had to rework this whole thing. So when we were reworking the collective fabric for COVID, that meant take-home kits. So we created kits that had the agar plates and the swabs and everything people needed. And the members of our lab took them home and they collected their own data. So they watched the plates grew, took photographs and uploaded them for anonymously for us to see. And they also answered some questions about their kind of emotional health in relation to COVID. So for example, what was something new that you care about? Then we took all of this data and we analyzed it. So me, Floor, and Jessica each created a digital fabric showcasing all of the plates and also these answers to these questions. And as you can see, they all look completely different because we're all humans and scientists are humans, right? And we all have the bias through which we see the world, and scientists are included in that. But it's really important that in science, we recognize that bias and we actively try to combat that and minimize it as much as we can. And so that kind of brings me to the goals of the collective fabric, which are really to use this art-based practice as a form of pedagogy with the goal of humanizing science and sparking curiosity by helping people build relationships with science. So really helping people, the general public, form a better relationship with science and scientists. And so when we were thinking about what public to work with, we really wanted to bring this into the classroom, especially for my interactive technology and pedagogy certificate program. So art as a pedagogy in the classroom, we are working with college students in a microbiome course at Hunter College Biology Department. So we actually get to do this entire fabric and everything with them in person. And then also working with high school students, specifically an art history course at Hunter High School. And it's thanks to the Lennihan grant that we were able to purchase all of the materials that we needed to actually put this whole thing together. And so when we started to work with students, we kind of wanted to, we really needed to make sure that we were gaining proper consent for research. And one of the questions as we were going through all of the, proper protocols for this was about, what is biological material? So because the collective fabric is all about sparking curiosity, I kind of want to leave you with a few questions to think about. As I introduced to you before, the microbiome is this collection of microbes that live on us and inside of us, and they're so different based on where we live, where we're from, what we eat. And so I kind of want you to think about, knowing what you've just learned here about the microbiome, do you think this is biological material? Do these cells belong to you, or are they their own unique organisms? And do you think that they are a unique identifier for you? So I'll leave you with those questions. If you would like to connect with us, I welcome you to. My email is sfrazard@gradcenter.cuny.edu, and our Instagram is @OurCollectiveFabric if you would like to follow up those questions with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So we have a question to answer. Please also, if anyone has questions regarding every project or a specific project, you can write them on the chat and we'll ask the question by the end of the session. So our next recipient is Hugo Janis from the anthropology department, who's going to speak about plastic on the shores.
Thank you. Hello. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, wonderful. Let me share the slides. Okay. So I can't see myself, so hopefully do you see my slides at the moment?
We don't.
No?
You need to
click
share.
Yeah, share
Yes.
screen.
I can share the slides if you want to go. Just tell me next slides.
Okay, it's just 3 slides. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Here we go.
There you go. That's starfish plastic.
All right.
All right, thank you. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Hugo Janis. I'm a 4th-year culture anthropology student. And for my project, I'm focusing on seashore plastic responses in Bahia, Brazil. So with the partial support of the Lennihan grant, earlier this year, I was able to go to Bahia, Brazil, and spend some months there with the question in mind of what seashore communities there are doing to deal with the plastics appearing and accumulating with each tide from the ocean. Those living in seaside communities throughout the world know that plastics from distant locations all over are accumulating daily in their coastal villages, leaving us with the challenge of fully facing these artificial residues. In some ways, you could say that the worst case scenario has already arrived in Bahia, where in 2019, there was a huge oil spill. And since then, there have been like black globs of petroleum kind of appearing on the beach. At one point, lots of it, tons of it daily. And now there's just like light residues, but the plastics as well. It's just a daily thing. Every tide washes up, just like a mystery of new things. And you can see like on that first slide, sometimes it's just like a kid's toy. It's, you know, everything you'd expect from bottles, bottle caps, pens, you know, toothpaste, toothbrushes, it's like everything, you know, and it's just like coming up with every tide. So so while in Bahia, I got to know one organization in specifically well, which is called Tartaru. You can go to the next slide. So Tartaru is a short for sea turtle, the name, for those that speak Spanish or Portuguese or Latin languages. And the picture there that you see is of Batista, who's the head of the institute. And these men call themselves Tarturogueiros, which is, could be translated to like turtle men or turtle warriors. And in their work to oversee sea turtle births along the Maru Peninsula, they've consequently become kind of the leading plastic cleanup, seashore cleanup activists as well, because these plastics were affecting the sea turtle births and basically, you know, any sort of human structures and stuff on the beach cause the sea turtles to not want to nest there. So this institute has now essentially like become a leader in organizing multirões, which are like big group cleanups of the beach. So this institute is going to be kind of like one of my main interlocutors moving forward with the project. So I hope to go back, get more funding, hopefully, and be able to spend more time with them to understand better the ecosystem and what kind of like social movements they're a part of in terms of these beach cleanups. It's important to note as well about the region. Bahia is the largest slave port during the colonial African diaspora. And so I do plan on learning more about that. I want to explore local cosmologies and conceptualizations of identity and race, as well as religion and spirituality, as these do not seem to fit Western or North Atlantic constructions and categories. So one potential idea for the project moving forward, as I spend more time in Bahia, is to focus in more on racial identity. Bahia is famous for being a place with, you know, over 40 terms to describe skin color. And so I'd like to look into potential correlations between racial identification and views and cosmologies with regard to plastic waste. But that's just an idea. We'll see moving forward, but how the project evolves. But yeah, that's what I got. And so there's one more slide. Well, that's just more things that you find as you walk along the beach. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. So our next presentant is Shima Ushiar, who's going to speak about infrastructure, ecology, and politics during the Cold War in Iran, and from the anthropology department again.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm really excited to present my research. I'm going to share my screen now, which hopefully will work. Did it work?
Yes.
Great. So my research is called Fluid States, Infrastructure, Ecology, and Politics during the Cold War in Iran from 1954 to 1989. And it's called Fluid States because my research is primarily concerned of thinking about how infrastructures transform politics. We usually tend to think of politics as taking place in the realm of, you know, policy, bureaucracy, governmental institutions, or social movements. But I really wanted to focus on how natural resources and development infrastructures and everyday services take on political dimensions and can actually be instrumental in forming political understandings of the world. So my research is focused on a dam irrigation and electrification project in Iran during the Cold War. This was from 1950s to 1970s. And the project was originally modeled actually on the American Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA, which some of you probably have heard of, but it was a project of rural electrification and dam building in the US in the 1930s. So during the Cold War, this TVA model of development was actually exported to third world countries all over the globe. And it was directed at improving agriculture and peasant farming in particular through these technological infrastructures as a way to counter and lessen the appeal of communist propaganda. So what were the results of this TVA for Iran, as it was called at the time? So the construction of these dams and new irrigation canals that I look at, they actually ended up removing a lot of control of the farmers and invested that control to a central government authority, which actually then got to dictate what the farmers could grow on their farms. And it also allowed a lot of these smallholder peasant lands to be consolidated and to be sold to agribusinesses, which led to the dispossession of a lot of farmers and to their displacement. And similarly with the electricity that was generated from these dams, a lot of it went to large industrial centers. So these were steel plants, petrochemical plants, and it bypassed a lot of the villages, some even just a few kilometers away from the dam. So already water and electricity infrastructures actually increased a lot of inequality, both urban and rural. But they also turned these infrastructures actually into political objects. So rectifying these inequalities actually became one of the rallying cries and slogans of protests during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. So one way that, that in my research I've been looking at this is, one of the consequential acts during the revolution was actually a strike by powerhouse workers that cut off electricity as a form of protest, and by cutting off the electricity, they were essentially cutting off the state's propaganda regime, which was being broadcast through television. And then after the revolution, another way that water and electricity again were sort of appropriated was that there were a lot of these sort of peri-urban movements that rose up and tried to take ownership of water and electricity infrastructure. So people were illegally tapping into all of these electricity infrastructures that were built, or they were illegally tapping into water pipes. So there was sort of this democratic movement of bottom-up appropriation of infrastructure immediately after the 79 revolution, which unfortunately did not last very long. So why does this history matter? Like why study this history? So one of the things that I'm interested in is to look at how we have inherited this dominant model of development and large-scale infrastructural building from the Cold War. So even though the Cold War itself is over, we are still sort of tied to this idea of economic growth, which is particularly concerning in the era of accelerating climate change. So, and as this history shows us, without democratic participation, ownership, attention to ecological problems, like Hugo just mentioned about the plastic, these large-scale development infrastructures are bound to sort of create the same political, economic, and ecological problems that define the conflicts of the last century. So, and I'll stop right there, but that's my research. Thank you.
Thank you, Shima. Well, as you can see, most projects do answer very well to the guidelines of the grant, right? To look at the intersection of environment, social research, but also arts. Speaking about art, our next presenter is Keon Keem from the Theater and Performance Department, and she's going to speak about post-human theater. Can you stop sharing your screen, Shima? Thank you.
Hi, let me start sharing my screen. Can you see it well?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Good evening, everyone. My name is Keon Keem, and I'm in Theater and Performance program. I'm writing a dissertation on contemporary East Asian theater and performance, and I study how East Asian artists deploy science and technology, for example, robots, 3D avatars to VR technologies, to grapple with the shifting notions of subjectivity, spirituality, and intelligence. And the grant supported my research, delving into the relations of technology and spirituality, and this will be developed into one of my dissertation chapters. So originally, I proposed to use the grants toward presenting a paper at an international symposium on theater and robotics, but due to the pandemic situations, I had to change my plans and went to a research trip to Switzerland and Germany in August 2021. During the trip, I saw two performances by two Asian artists presented at international theater and festivals. And here you see some photos taken from my trip. And these two performances bring technological devices and East Asian shamanic practices together. For example, in the work of Korean artist Jaha Gus, The History of Korean Western Theater, you see in this photo, it featured a talking rice cooker and an origami robot as supporting actors of the show, and with shamanic ritual dances usually performed at traditional Korean funerals or memorial services. And all of this together was proposed to kind of design and propose a different origin and different history and different future of Korean theater. And in my next example, the Singaporean artist Chorka Fai's productions, he often collaborates with spiritual mediums and conjures the spiritual entities through shamanic invocations. So in this photo, it's not like very visible, but the 3D avatar you see on the back of the screen is animated by a human dancer performing on stage and wearing motion capture sensors on his body. Here is a photo from a different production, but you can take a closer look at the dancer on stage wearing motion captures, and behind the screen, very large screen, the 3D avatar is animated. And another photo example showing a shaman in training on stage, chanting, facing the 3D avatar of a dead Japanese dance master. So in this in-person research trip gave me an opportunity to observe and locate these performances in a larger context and network of not only artists and performers, but also producers, audiences, and institutions. And after attending these shows, I had some informal interviews with the artists and the team, and including a dramaturg, technician, and a hacker involved in the project. So why is the project important? Asian bodies, especially East Asian bodies, have been represented as robotic, cybernetic, and less than human in global Western popular imaginations, which are usually set in dystopian futures. And my research challenges this techno-orientalism, a phenomenon of imagining Asia in hyper-technological terms, but also moves beyond the critique of such representations. So instead, I investigate these artists whose project construct alternative possibilities and design different relations of Asian bodies and advanced technologies. And ultimately, by bringing these culturally specific relations among technology, the humans and ghosts and spirits, and the cosmos in East Asia, my research challenges the normative assumptions about the universality of techno cultures, which is centered on Western traditions and practices. And in conclusion, in addition to turning this project into a dissertation chapter, I'll be working on a performance review of the piece to Asian Theater Journal. And hopefully when the travel restrictions ease up in the coming year, I'll be able to attend some more theater festivals happening in East Asia and conduct some interviews with the professional artists developing the VR theaters in Asia. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Keon. Remember, if you have questions, to write them in the chat so we can ask them by the end of the presentation. Our next presenter is Max Papadantonakis from the Department of Sociology, and Max is going to speak about meritocracy or precarity and the multiple inequalities in New York City's high-tech industry.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thank you for organizing this. Thanks for everybody involved. And thank you so much for supporting my research. I will be presenting to you today my dissertation. I find myself in the final stages of writing my dissertation. I have only one chapter left, so I'll give you an overview of what I've been working on. Let me share my screen. Okay, good evening. My PhD dissertation presents a critical analysis of New York City's tech industry before and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. My work contributes to a better understanding of the intersectional forms of job precarity that affect software workers in New York City. We are told by economists, policymakers, and business leaders that the economy of the future will be based on jobs of the future. These high-paying jobs will usually involve skilled software developers and engineers who will design and build innovative and groundbreaking technologies. From 2018 till today, I conducted 130 interviews with software developers and engineers working for their city's largest tech companies. My respondents explained to me that there is much more job precarity in the software industry than people are aware of. Respondents talked to me about the threat of obsolescence due to rapid technological change, the insecurity of temporary work contracts, overwork and burnout, having to change jobs every few years, lack of security, and getting replaced by younger workers once they reach their mid-30s. As I expanded my sample to include more women and people of color, groups severely underrepresented in the software industry, as the following two graphs show, I found out that it was not just the jobs that were precarious, but highly skilled software workers brought their own precarities to these jobs. The workers I talked to described racialized, gendered, and age discriminatory work environments that negatively affected their work and barred them from advancing their careers. While jobs are reserved for a selected elite pool of candidates, precarious software jobs that are temporary, lower wage, less prestigious, and routinized are given predominantly to women and people of color. These jobs engage less with building technologies, are more design or testing oriented, and are also more prone to technological change. So the conclusion that my dissertation really brings up forth is that workers are relegated to disadvantaged job positions within software development, and also stigmatized as less talented and hardworking than workers of the dominant groups. My dissertation shows how job precarity is intensified through the combined effects of class, gender, race, and age-based inequalities. Every chapter of my dissertation shows how these intersectional precarities, what I call them, are reproduced both at the level of individual and group subjectivities and at the organizational level of the tech firm, despite this promotion of a meritocratic work culture. To conclude, I would like to leave you with two important questions. If high-profile tech jobs are exacerbating the inequality already affecting our city, what does this mean about the future of New York? And we're familiar with the tech sector's growth, especially during the pandemic. Can the tech sector continue to grow without empowering all tech workers and providing good jobs for all? Thank you very much. Oh, wrong computer.
Thank you, Max. Thank you for your presentation. One thing also that I would like to bring everyone's attention on is the fact that most of our participants had to find creative ways to reformulate their projects throughout the pandemics. And I find it quite amazing that they found ways to still progress in their project, even though the circumstances were, as we all know, extremely challenging. Our next presenters are Silvia Rivera Alfaro and Ernesto Cuba, both from the LILAC program, the Latin American, Ibero, and Latino Cultures program at the GC.
Thank you so much. I will share the screen in 1 second so you can see the slides. And in June 2020, Ernesto and I started a digital project named Indisciplinades, Feminist Linguistic Circle, which is a Spanish-speaking learning and research community with participants across the Americas and Europe. We do feminist cyber activism, and our main platform is the website that you can see on the upper right. We are here because the Dr. Louis Lennihan grant supported our first feminist linguistics editatona, which is the Spanish word for a feminist editaton.
The reasons to organize this editathon were, first, the existence of a gender gap in Wikipedia. From the total of editors in Spanish Wikipedia, only between 9 and 15 are women, and only 22 of biographical entries in Spanish Wikipedia are about women. Second, the language gap in Wikipedia. Spanish is the third most used language in Wikipedia after English and Chinese. Also, it is the second language in number of users, but ninth in number of articles. Third, there is more content generated in Spain than in Latin America. Our editatona was special because it was focused on female and LGBT professionals of the Spanish language. Also, the organizing committee were from Peru, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Mexico, and Costa Rica. Their names are in the smaller image in the middle, so you can see. And we had help and guidance from Wikipedia, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. Wikimedians Uruguay, and Art and Feminism, Latin America, and Peru.
Following a pedagogical plan, the editatona began with a Wikipedia skills workshop by a feminist Wikimedian. On the right, you can see the participants of this workshop. We held a workshop on gender fair language, focusing on the strategies that could have more acceptance in Wikipedia. Then we had a panel discussion on editatonas as feminist and linguistic activism with the feminist Wikimedia leaders that you can see below. Then we had 2 sessions of editing in Wikipedia. Finally, we had an amazing lecture titled The Contribution of Women in Hispanic Language Studies.
The editatona drew great interest and participation. 200 people from 10 different countries registered, 100 confirmed, but only approximately 50 people attended most activities. A limitation was the lower number of participants in the editing activities, where only 20 people attended. The purple image with women marching says, "Let's intervene Wikipedia," a intervenir Wikipedia. A great achievement was creating and editing Wikipedia content about Spanish-speaking women and LGBTQ+ language professionals. According to the Wikimedia dashboard that you see in the screenshot in the middle, 26 editors participated, created 5 articles, and edited another 15. In total, we all applied 256 edition changes. In the far right, you see the entry we created for Maria Luisa Calero Vaquera, our keynote speaker. An important limitation was the dashboard itself, because it gives a misleading account of references. It only tracked the 4 references in English Wikipedia, while we added many more in Spanish. Also, the event was a great opportunity to democratize knowledge and create online open access materials.
After the event, along with Mariana Favila Alcalá, which is a a person from Mexico that is part of our community. We shared our experience in Digitorium, an event on digital pedagogy. We are currently creating a paper departing from that presentation. Also this month, Ernesto and Mariana will replicate the Gender Fair Language workshop in a music editathon. And we look forward to delivering the workshop as part of our open activities and organizing a second editathon. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias to both of you and to this collective project also. We love to see how the projects have traveled across borders. Our last presenter is Ngatan from the Sociology department, and the presentation is on the social world of GAP, hate speech, misinformation, and online extremism. So please let us learn about that on this Zoom world.
Thank you. I'm just gonna, when you spoke basically read out my title, it sounds very clickbaity, but let's just do it, I guess. So yeah, hi everyone. I'm basically will present to you the kind of evolution of my research project and how it started out as a kind of collaborative research project to a dissertation proposal. And the Lennihan grants was basically enabled me to dig deeper into this particular research project. So I'll give you some context about where did this research come about. So in 2019, I basically got into a research project with two PhD students in the social psychology department, Diane Young and Friederike Windel, and Professor Maria Rodriguez, who's leading the Carrot Lab at University of Buffalo now. She was at CUNY then. Our team got together and basically got very interested in the idea of how could we explore the intersection between social media and the rise of the white nationalist discourse on social media. And we stumbled upon this platform called GAP, G-A-B. It is still one of the most popular platforms out there that is that runs mainly on the far right user base. And for example, after Trump left the presidency this year, he reached out to the CEO of Gap to buy Gap because of the user base that has about 3 million active users in the US and probably in Eastern Europe and some part of Asia. And so basically we stumbled upon this platform and tried to collect some data from the platform, and we were able to use the pushshift.io API to collect 38 million data points, meaning the text being produced on this platform from the very beginning of the platform until the late 2019. So our data set basically covered the 4 years of existence of this very platform. And our initial research question was relatively simple. When mainstream social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter started to exercising their censorship ability, where do extremist users go and what do they talk about, right? And we approached this research questions from the angle of doing research about the alt-rights, which was a popular discourse back in 2019. And we found that in the literature, the alt-rights was identified as independent intellectual rights that rejects establishment's conservatism. It is a decentralized movement that lacks organizational structure that is based mainly online, identified as white, male, and agreed. Their core interests are against feminism and multiculturalism. And just to preface, all of the people in our research team were women, mostly women of color, and one person has identified themselves as queer. So they seek to cultivate a new image of white supremacy that sheds Nazi insignias and KKK white hoods. And we as a team decided that we wanted to approach this project from this angle of social media and the alt-right. At that time when we started this project, Jesse Daniels just wrote a piece for Context magazine describing this phenomenon whereby the rights in the United States basically takes advantage of the algorithmic nature of our internet right now. What does it mean by the algorithmic nature of our internet? Basically, internet content creation, production, and consumption are no longer free for all. The content that we consume on a daily basis now are basically monitored and curated and produced by algorithms, right? And Jesse Daniels also wrote another book back in the 2000s arguing that the rights in the United States are not simply using technology as is, they are technologically opportunistic people, meaning that they're actively creating technology for their own, to basically spread their ideology, right? So we also know by then that the alt-rights also employ strategic use of memes, bots, and leverage their knowledge of internet culture and irony. The alt-right discourse on Twitter centers around the support for Trump, white nationalism, and anti-Muslim discourse. So what we decided to use a particular method called structural topic modeling to automate the content analysis part of our project. What we found was that we found a few important cluster of topics of discussions. One was to support Trump. Two is Holocaust denial. It's a very important kind of like strong topic discussion on this platform. The third topic is the sentiment, the anti-established mainstream media establishments sentiments, and we also see it everywhere. The last topic is around the kind of cultural idea or cultural imagery that the alt-rights movements is using, including red pill, blue pills, and the idea and on this platform, the emergence of QAnon as a movement. So my dissertation basically expands this research. For the research, I only use a very small slice of data, while in my dissertation, I would want to basically examine all the contents of the data, and also, yeah.
Enga, I'm gonna ask you to start closing so we can have time for question and answers.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is the last slide.
Perfect.
Yes. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that I'm just basically going deeper and deeper into each topic that I was mentioning in the previous slides, and using the newer methods that I have discovered over the summer. The very last slide, I'm sorry about this, that the Lennihan grant was also enabling me to present a paper that I co-wrote with two other computer scientists to look into the newest topic modeling methods that would enable me to examine the amount of the data that I have. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you, everyone. We've had many comments in the chat saying that those topics are really amazing and relevant. So I wanted to share that with you all. Since we are in a friendly environment, we're going to open the floor for questions. If people want to read their questions, you might raise your hand and we'll help you, we'll let you ask your question directly. If you're not feeling like speaking or shy or whatever, we can read your questions, so you can still send your questions in the chat. Just before that, I have two questions that I would like to ask the recipients regarding the process. And you may answer one or the other or both quickly. There's no problem. But I wanted to ask you what and how the pandemic has made you change your strategies. For those of you who did not already comment on that, and what was something that you found out that maybe you wouldn't if you didn't have to change your strategy. The second question is, in terms of pedagogy and communicating your work and reaching out to the community, because so many of you had projects that were mainly, or that had like a communication pedagogy component, what was one thing that you really learned about communicating on your work? Question one, how has the pandemic impacted your research and what did you discover that you did not expect? Question two, what did you learn about pedagogy while working on communicating your project? Josephine.
So I spoke a little bit about how my research data collection wise was impacted, but also I lost my brother about a day or two before the quarantine in March 2020. So I began to think about the role of images in regards to grieving and how memory and collective memory is shaped largely by our exchange of stories, and how that involves a very embodied or sensory experience. So I was thinking about how social media platforms, text messages, all this digital ways of exchanging hugs almost, or sharing stories of my brother would have been different had I been able to be with everyone he and I knew. And it made me think, everybody is now, it's considered I would argue, to be a cultural trauma. And how those who may have experienced deaths not related to COVID stick out like a sore thumb in that way. And the powerful role images become enhanced in that way. And I would like to explore that further when loss is involved, especially the loss of human connection among those who you rely on most when you're grieving. And in terms of the teaching, I was very excited to employ a visual sociology midterm component to all my classes, all 4 of them, and hoping to create a hashtag and a visual archive of all their work because it was fantastic. So hopefully I'll be able to share that sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Shima.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer the first question. I mean, I was in the middle, so I did a lot of archival research, and my research had already been impacted by my decision to not spend a lot of time in Iran itself collecting a lot of material. So I did some research in Iran before, but most of my material had to come from other sources. So I had to think about, finding sources like newspapers and all of these things in, from Washington, D.C., the National Archives. I went to England. So I was sort of all over the place to find archives for my research. So it definitely, I think, impacted the direction of the research itself and what I was able to collect. So I don't have, for example, direct interviews like that. So I've mostly basically focused on archives, and whether they're company or institutional or newspapers, magazines, things like that.
Thank you. Silvia?
Yes, I will have an answer for both, kind of together. And Ernesto and I have been working together on gender and language and sexuality, thinking or talking about it since 2018. And with the pandemic was actually an opportunity for us because we wanted to learn what was going on in Latin America. That was the question that motivated us. And being digital and having everybody home and connecting with people was a great opportunity for us, because the few people we know that could be on the same subject that we worked with were very lonely. Like this is what they reported in the first meetings that we have. And they reported that it was so nice to find a community of people working the same subjects, and we have connected a lot thanks to that. And while doing the Ditatona, it's just that it mixes with the entire project that is bigger than the Ditatona. When we did the Ditatona, we, at least for me, and I can say it because as Sara, I am part of the ITP certificate program. And the part of digital pedagogy for us was like the questions were, how do we make the event to be online, not to be so overwhelming for people because there were multiple events. How much do we distance them? Being from different countries, what's the best time to make the events and the best part of the year for most people? And also, well, the most important was how we put people together to create new knowledge. And that's why we created materials, how we do these to be a way of learning more also for other people in our field and the general public. And also what we can give to Wikipedia, that was our Gender Fair Language workshop, that is not commonly taught or like part of those events. And you can see our website in the chat that Ernest just shared with everyone.
Thank you. I'm gonna start asking questions for the audience. Sarah, I see your hand. Maybe we have questions for you from the audience. So I'm gonna start with Zeus. And if you want to speak about pedagogy or one of those elements, you're welcome. So for Sarah, we have this one question. Using microbiome art, what can you teach students about biology and or biological research? And I think it might actually give you the opportunity to answer or to speak about what you were about to say.
Yeah, exactly. This kind of, I've talked enough about, or I kind of mentioned already how COVID sort of impacted this, but what adding art for us really, using art as a pedagogy, actually, one of the big things I think with COVID is, my project is very much about microbes that grow on you that are good and healthy for you. And with COVID, we're so, everything that is potentially a microbe seems like it's scary and it's not healthy, right? So kind of bringing this art in, like there's been so much misinformation and disinformation surrounding COVID and scientists, and it's kind of really unraveled a lot, I think. And so for us in using this project, we really wanted to introduce art because it already lends itself to creating emotional connections and to creating, these different types of thoughtful processes. And so we wanted to have people take those same approaches to science and to kind of, look at science in a different light. And what's really important about that too is that, for scientists, if art is a way that helps us to communicate what we're working on and what we're doing, that really only helps to diversify the field even further. Because if you can find a way that you're able to communicate your science that's not, dense and just to other scientists, if you can use art as a way to do that, that really kind of helps widen the field and benefits biological research. And another kind of component that I wanted to say to that was that like just the microbiome in general is a great tool to get people interested in biological research. Like, for example, like people, before we knew about DNA sequencing and how to do that, and before it was really something that was an accessible tool, people plated bacteria and thought that everyone's bacteria that they grew on these plates were the same. Like just by visual, some of these things look quite similar, but it wasn't until sequencing developed. So the ability to take all of these unique genetic information out of these bacteria and figure out what they were actually with their DNA sequences allowed us to actually realize how diverse it was. So that kind of shows the, how biological research is involved in the microbiome right now. Like it's such a hot topic now. And I hope like gets people excited about like the things that it can, the things that we're learning about it every day.
Thank you. I have here a question for Max. Are the firms able to make it seem like the jobs are not precarious by touting second jobs people are able to get? Are workers, in fact, able to get jobs after working at one firm to another?
Thank you for the question. Thank you, Lynn. I don't know about touting second jobs, but in my research, definitely there's a main topic of my dissertation is the normalization of precarity that firms predominantly through their meritocratic ideology kind of espouse, and also not just the meritocratic ideology, but also pushing the workers to see their careers in entrepreneurial ways, as self-investment, which means that you have to be open to disruption, to flexible work hours, temporary work contracts. Don't be afraid to fail. You will fail. It is definite that you will fail. But who can fail? Who has the privilege? Who has the advantages to fail, and who doesn't? So there is definitely a celebration of precarity in a way. They don't call it precarity, obviously. They call it disruption. The second question was about, are workers in fact able to get jobs working at one firm? Yeah. So, and let me talk a little bit about COVID, because I didn't talk about it, and I knew it was going to come up in the questions. Let me first say that COVID, there's a saying in Greece, I don't know if this is the same in the English language. I found luck in my misfortune, because I was actually having, well, not Zoom, Skype interviews with software engineers before COVID, because that was their preferred method of communication. They're already working remote. So the transition for me, at least in the research part, was very smooth. Obviously, in all the other areas of life, we all know what happened. But so COVID did not really disrupt my research. And as I said, I'm very lucky within my misfortune. One thing that I found out during COVID, though, that was very interesting, at least for software engineers, maybe not in the first months where there were strict lockdowns, but later there was a lot of movement. And actually the workers that were more part of the elite, that had the good networks and the good connections, they actually could bargain their position, and they could move from job to job much easier during the pandemic, because businesses were so desperate for software engineers that there was a lot of demand. And that mostly the guys, the young men who I consider see as the ideal workers of the tech industry, they could use that as leverage. All workers go from job to job. Again, and sorry, I'm going too much, but I'll finish it at that. It's not the problem that there are jobs. There are many jobs, but the quality of the jobs is bad. And you can change jobs, you can find another job, but when you look at the conditions of each job in software engineering, the frontier jobs, the amazing jobs that are presented in the new economy, we find a lot of precarity in them. And that precarity is intensified once we take an intersectional lens and we see the positions of other groups of workers.
Thank you, Max. I have a question for Shima here. Do you know if Cold War era development projects were similar in areas of influence so distant as Latin America and Iran? I'm thinking about their ethos and ideologies more than in natural resources.
The short answer to that is yes. And actually the same American consulting firm that did this TVA project was actually directed by the managers and directors of the original TVA, who went into the private consulting business. They tried to do similar projects in Colombia. It didn't really take off in Colombia. They talked about doing something in Brazil. And they tried to do something in Vietnam after the Vietnam War. And also Lebanon, Turkey, other places. But Iran was actually the most comprehensive and the most advanced that they got, because they had a lot of latitude and control in what they could actually do in the countries, in the rural areas. So yes, there's a reason that still all of these countries attach their progress and, this idea of, quote, modernity to these, industrialization and large-scale infrastructure. So it's, the answer is yes.
Thank you. We still have few questions, many questions actually. If you want to ask your questions yourself, please, just raise your hand and we'll give you the microphone. I have here a question for Keon. What is your motivation to work on this topic? Additionally, do you plan to bring your findings into forms of art and performance?
Yeah, thank you for the question. The motivation, I guess it all started from also taking interactive technology and pedagogy courses. I was reading about the history of technology and mostly reading like feminist science and technology studies, and very inspired by the post-human theories that's like redefining what it means to be human in regard to the recent technological and scientific advances. But at the same time, I found it fascinating, but at the same time, I found that like my relation to technology, my relation to the body from coming from South Korea, East Asia is kind of different. And I was thinking how much of the discourses about the post-human, which is about like kind of challenging the Western understanding of the human as the center of everything, is still centering on like examples from the Western arts and other traditions. So I started the research to look into what some East Asian artists are working on. And then I kind of found that like many of these like very young artists who are working with this very advanced technologies are really getting into this like spiritual dimensions. And then they bring Buddhist practices or Taoist practices or some shamanic traditions. And I was wondering and questioning how kind of bringing into this spiritual dimension that's like, or the world of the dead, in addition to the current discussions, the binary discussions about the technology and the human body, or like organic and inorganic, nature and culture, all these binaries, how we can actually expand those binaries and like kind of think beyond those terms. So those are my motivations, and I'm excited. It's an exciting question to think about if I'm interested in bringing this into art and performance, and I'd love to if I have the capacity. But at the same time, I'm thinking about like at least inviting some artists to start a conversation or like have some interview once it gets more possible to invite some artists.
Thank you. Ernesto, you have your hand raised.
Somebody asked us about, I'm gonna read the question here, is, so I am curious how your presentation might work in Spanish and in an English dominant space as a way to illustrate what it takes to need translation. So first of all, the motivation to create a circle among many is to give a space for Spanish written publications, to get education on language and gender made in Spanish, published in Spanish for Spanish speakers from Latin America. So instead of reading, the global north authors, who are amazing, of course, we tried to make bridges with people from Spain, from Central America, from South America, from Brazil. So we don't think that much in terms of translation. Actually, the only translation we had was in the Editatona, was translating from Spanish to Portuguese from some Brazilian colleagues who were there. So yeah, I think it's more like thinking how to fill out two gaps. As we said, the language gap in Wikipedia, the language gap in publications on gender, language, and sexuality, and also an educational gap, because in Latin America and Spain, there are very, very, very few courses on language and gender, on feminist linguistics. So people have the idea that nobody has studied this, but many, many people have studied this since many years ago. But we have to create some kind of, community of learning community. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have two more questions. So I'll ask you to be brief in your answers. One is for Josephine. Thank you for your presentation. It was interesting listening to research behind your project and your motives, how you thought about presenting an image to a group and asking them to provide text or writing when they see an image found or from your personal family album. Asking them what they see based on their own family experience and then using that to appropriate an image. As a photographer making work around personal experiencing growing up, I often found the work being a visual journal and quite introspective. As I continue to make work, I found the need to explore a larger population, given it a slightly different meaning and a more diverse response and/or visual interaction to the image. So do you have any thoughts on that possibility?
Yes, thank you for the question. Photo elicitation or photo voice methodologies are the primary methodologies used within visual sociology to examine photographs. So photo elicitation is where you would present an image to an individual, whether or not you created it or not, and ask a few questions, kind of like a supplemental survey. Whereas photo voice is where you give the camera to the participants. So I find in order to address the barrier or the struggles that you're facing is it's not that I shared, it was my family. So I was lucky because I had COVID. So I had already a pre-existing understanding of what that image meant to my family. So if I were to do that with another, I would have liked to give them a camera and perhaps the rest of their family a camera, and then have a kind of focus group among them. And the methodologies to do that are limited, but I hope to contribute to that as I continue my analysis. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you. I have one last question here that I think was not completely answered during your presentation for Sarah. I would like to know your experience as a biologist in this process. What does it add to your perception about your discipline?
Yeah, so I think a really big thing is like kind of this communication component. So when I go and work with people, like it's really important for me as biologist to understand how do I communicate my science to the general public. So like what I study is not microbiome related at all. It's about parasites, but I still have to find ways to communicate that effectively. And so for the collective fabric, that's really kind of opened my eyes to the ways that that can look, right? And how art doesn't have to look any like one specific type of way. The art that we're creating here is very much this experience, this embodied experience of visualizing these teeny tiny little microorganisms and making them really big so that people can understand it. So I think when it comes to like my biologist lens on it, it's really an interesting way for me as a biologist to work with Flor as an artist, and together both kind of mix our viewpoints onto this project to hopefully meet people who are somewhere in the middle of biologist and artist, so we can connect with them on a way, whereas, you know, that they see the art and they see the science that's in their everyday life and living on their bodies.
Thank you. And to both of you, actually, we have that question that Kathy asked first, a conversation between Sarah and Josephine. Metaphorically, what is Nan Goldin's microbiome? And by that, I mean the microbiome changes by its environment, including violence. How do each of you think about one another's use of photography and art as evidence, including health, social, medical, and otherwise? So if you have like very brief words, and then we'll end this great session.
Yeah, I think that, you know, when we think about the microbiome and how much it can change, you know, I think when I think of violence, like, you know, as a microbiologist and, you know, I study parasites, like I said, we kind of very often use this language of violence when we talk about the wars that are going on between your immune system and the microbes that are living inside of it. And so I think that, you know, we kind of also come up with this discussion of the microbiome that lives on us. You know, is it really part of us? These are bacterial cells that rely on us, but like we also rely on them. Like, who's the most important person in the situation? Who's fighting with who? And so it is kind of like a family of all of these organisms that live inside of you and on you. And so, yeah, we've kind of played with that question as well, as like, when you have a pathological bacteria, how is that different from the ones that are beneficial to you? Because we need them all and they need us as well.
Thank you. I found the visual representation of the microbiome and it expanding to being more diverse, really helpful in terms of how I conceptualize violence, in terms of not drawing a very strong line between abuser and victim / survivor, and being able to acknowledge that and coexist with it. Because as generational trauma studies have shown, we may not be aware of the impact that it has, though it's having a very strong impact. And in order to be able to uncover those roots, we have to kind of accept that it may be healthier for us to exist with both. I feel as if personally that my history made me more resilient. There's not always the illness that's going to kill you of the microbiome, right? It's both, and you need both. So I found your discussion of the expanding visual representation to be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. So I would like to thank everyone for their great presentation and the very interesting, amazing, and really creative variety of projects you brought. I'm going to let Dashima Oyo, FI Director, close this session. But again, thank you to the audience and to the presenters for this great presentation and exchanges.
So hello, everyone. Thank you again for staying late. The presentations were outstanding. I really commend these 9 doctoral scholars in the research that they're doing. And I also want to send a special thank you to the Lennihan for providing us to do this grant. And then finally, I wanted to address one of the comments that came up. So the Lennihan grants are micro grants that are open to graduate center doctoral students at this time. We will be doing another announcement of grants in February. In addition to that, we will also be announcing our Notari research grants as well. So if you want to learn more about the Futures Initiative, all the great work that we're doing, I encourage you to please follow us on our social media. Please sign up for our newsletter. We have several events per year. This is our final University Worth Fighting For event for the year, but we have much more coming inside of the next semester. So thank you again for staying late. This event was recorded as well as it was live streamed on our YouTube channel. We will be writing a recap post, and we will also be posting this on our Futures Initiative website and our Haystack website. So thank you again to all of the presenters, and thank you, special thanks to Colleen for doing such a fabulous job moderating and planning this event. Thank you all. Have a great evening.